I'll warn you, Pastor Heine, Pastor Kane is taping our session here.
Oh,
so.
well, he's the one that gave me this.
He set you up. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about writing lesson plans classically. The overview, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. We are going to first review the classical tools for planning. What you're going to discover throughout this is, if you were expecting to come in here and I'm going to give you a bunch of handouts and here's where you fill in this and here's how you write that, you may be a little disappointed at first because most of what we're going to talk about right now is the tools that we have to plan our lessons in a classical way. When we actually get down to writing them, which we do need to do, we need to write out our course, our unit, and our individual lesson plans, that really is however you record information best. Handwritten, make a really nice, pretty Excel spreadsheet, and color code it, whatever you normally do for your kind of note and jotting down and communication style. So most of what we're going to talk about here are the tools that you have that you want to make sure are in your plans as classical educators, and then we'll do a Q&A. So, classical tools for planning. We have the trivia methodology, which gives us tools. It gives us grammar tools. It gives us logic tools. It gives us rhetoric tools. I will pause for just a minute to tell you that at the end of this, the last slide has my email address. Feel free to jot things down that you want to remember and take away, but I'd be happy to email this presentation to you. You just have to email me first and ask for it. We also have quadrivium methodology tools. So you have arithmetic tools, geometry tools, music tools, and astronomy tools. So we're going to go through all of those in order, trivium, then quadrivium. So grammar tools first. You're going to use grammar tools regularly for students in grades 4 and below. We use grammar tools all the way down into our preschool. Okay? Our preschool is not full daycare. We don't have kids all day. We keep them in the mornings. Our 2-year-olds are only here 2 days a week, and then we kind of slowly increase that, but always just in the mornings to give them some grammar tools that they can continue to practice at home with mom and dad. Use all of these tools, or use these tools, the grammar tools, for all students at the beginning of new subjects, concepts, units, lessons, etc. We never outgrow grammar. Even if you have a 12th grader, if you are starting a new subject, a new topic, new vocabulary, anything that is new, you start at the grammar level. Grammar tools help us as teachers to drill and repeat material. Unit and lesson plan focus when using grammar tools should be on facts, rules and exceptions, definitions, and vocabulary. So if you are trying to teach any of these things, pull from grammar tools. Okay, this is how we start to think classically as educators about how we're planning our lessons. We look at what are we trying to teach the scholar? What is the scholar trying to learn? Is it new material? Is it facts, rules, exceptions, definitions, and vocabulary? If it's any of those, pull from grammar tools when you are making your lessons. All right, so here are some good grammar tools to use. We have chants, with or without music. And don't kid yourselves that at some age the kids outgrow singing little cutesy jingles. They don't. If you can do it with some whimsy, a teeny bit of sarcasm perhaps for some of the boys that are that old, but just you have fun with it. If you can have fun with it as an adult and it makes it stick in your head, then they're going to have fun with it too, no matter how old they are. It works well, chants with or without music works well for items that are in a succession or a pattern. When you need it in a certain order, chants work well. So some examples of that. I know we had the Shirley rep here this week. Are you guys familiar with Shirley English? Do you use it in your programs? Okay, so you know the pros and cons. When it first started, it really fit very well into classical schools. It has evolved because it is a curricular program. They are trying to sell curriculum. And most of the schools around are public schools that are progressive and Common Core. So they, like many other publishers, are now, we are Common Core standards. It's not hard to get Common Core standards, by the way, but that's their push because their job is to sell curriculum. This does not mean that somehow the Shirley jingles now are all of a sudden out of what we would like for classical and now they're progressive. But we don't use, neither do we as a school use everything in Shirley. We focus primarily on the grammar portion of how she teaches grammar, how you get kids to know what a noun is, what a verb is, and so forth. The writing, we go elsewhere. We go elsewhere for our writing. We go elsewhere for our literature. We just use her for grammar. When I was first introduced to her, it was not called Shirley English. It was called Shirley Grammar. All it was the grammar program. Everything else has been added on as they tried to sell curricula. So just keep that in mind. But Shirley Jingles and the question-answer flow are great examples of chance. The whole thing is you get kids to remember what an adverb is. An adverb modifies a verb. Okay, just everything is a chance. Latin fist pops. Joanna Hensley, if you took her Latin class this week or when you were here, or if you've ever seen her doing one of her Latin presentations, she teaches conjugations with fist pops. So she has the kids go, a bow, a bus, a bot, a bamus, a batus, a bont. And there's so many things that she can do with that. She then maybe has, instead of fist pops, she'll have half the class be the root and then half be the stem. And they go, you can get a good workout in, okay, as you're reviewing your conjugations in Latin. Especially great if you have a very active physical class or a bunch of boys that need to get some energy out. Days of the week preschool. I've actually heard 2 songs for days of the week. I'll sing one of them. First comes Monday, then comes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, then comes Sunday, that is church day. Then we start the week again. Very simple tunes. You can have kids memorize a lot. Subordinate conjunctions. I taught this jingle before I was introduced to Shirley Grammar because I realized as a high school English teacher that I needed my students to know subordinate conjunctions. Now, does anyone in here, I had a bigger group to pull from last time, so no pressure, but does anyone here know what subordinate conjunctions start?
Dependent clauses.
Which kind?
Dependent
clauses. Why do we need to know about dependent clauses? What kind of sentences do dependent clauses help us create? Complex sentences, exactly. And depending on where the independent clause is and where the dependent clause is, dictates where we put a comma. So all of these things, punctuation, forming complex sentences, all starts with being able to know what a dependent clause is and how it is formed. So I have my students memorize subordinate conjunctions. So notice there's purpose for the memorization. We're not just memorizing for the sake of memorizing, although sometimes that is great too because it is a great exercise in and of itself. But in this case, I had them memorize, and you will soon, the subordinating conjunctions that start dependent clauses. There are 21 main subordinating conjunctions, and we are going to memorize them in 3 columns of 7. I'm going to kind of model how I would do this so that you can kind of take this away, that this is one way. It's the echo after or the popcorn approach. We'll get into echo after in a little more detail in just a minute. So I'm going to say it first. After, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. After, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. Notice a little bit of whimsy there. Again, if you're doing it with high school students, the first time I did this was in California, and they loved the as if. It was just great. The boys did just as well as the girls. All right, so after, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. The next column. Before, if, in order that sense, so that, than, though. Now there's another one. It's not just because I'm in Texas. I have always said than because I want my students to know it's not then, T-H-E-N, which is always an adverb, and it never starts a subordinate conjunction. It just works even better now that I'm in Texas to add the little bit of the accent. So before, if, in order that sense, so that, than, though. Before, if, in order that sense, so that, than, though. The last column goes unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. I'll do it one more time. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. Perfect. And so just in a few moments, we as adults who don't memorize nearly as well as students have just memorized the 21 subordinating conjunctions. Notice how notice how a little bit of inflection difference or a change in how you say something or even a little bit of whimsy helps to even make the memorizing easier. Repetition and catechesis is another grammar tool that we have. I learned this from Pastor Keyser last year at CCLE. Catechesis is not a theological word. I didn't know that. I mean, I figured it was from catechism, which of course our catechism is theological, but catechesis actually comes from two Greek roots. Kata, which means after, and eche, which means sound. So in catechesis, students sound after or echo after to learn word for word. The reason Luther called it a catechism was not because it was a spiritual word. He called it a catechism because that's how he wanted it to be taught to the young children by their fathers, in an echo after pattern, back and forth, word for word. Pastor Keyser even said in his lesson last year that Luther emphasized just so strongly that one of the things he warned churches about once the catechism came out is not to change the wording. Whatever you do, do not change the wording, because the way he envisioned this going into the heart, the learn by heart pattern, was in this echo after pattern. And for those, the catechism switched to the new wording 2 years after I was confirmed. And so I remember my sibling, my brother, who is 2 years younger than I, they kind of grandfathered him in, but then the next sibling had to switch in the middle of his catechesis training on the wording. Very, very difficult. You can do it. It's not impossible. And, we all as adults, if you learned the old version and now are at a school where you're reciting the new version, we're getting it down. But every once in a while, you still slip into that old. That's how powerful the catechesis is in terms of memorization. The catechesis, or that repetition, echo after. If you're talking about preschoolers, you can say popcorn. They really understand that it kind of pops back and forth. Okay, that sort of pattern of learning or of memorization works really well for definitions, rules, and vocabulary, and especially if you want to learn things word for word. On the contrary, if you don't need to learn things word for word, but you do need to memorize a series of things, mnemonic devices are often very helpful to use. These are great for when word for word is not necessary. I'm going to give you two examples of this. The first is the stacking example. So you're going to be picturing things for me, and we're going to be talking back and forth, kind of in a dialogue. We're going to try to keep our answers as short as possible and try to keep them the same, just for the sake of the fact that we're a group and we're giving group answers. So I'm going to have you do some picturing. Now, for stacking examples, if you're doing picturing in your mind, even though the stacking itself is a grammar level activity, if you're not actually physically stacking things in front that kind of remind students about the words or the things that they're memorizing, then that really is a higher level brain function skill. You may have to wait until they're at least at that logic stage with their brain. Okay? If you actually visually have it here, then it works even at the grammar level. But let's go ahead and try this. So first, I want you to picture a plate. And on the bottom of this plate, it's made by Della. So in my hands is a plate made by. On top of the plate is a pencil standing up. On top of we have a pencil and then a plate made by. Good. On top of the pencil, there is a Jersey cow. So we have a Jersey cow. On top of a plate. Made by Della. Good. On top of the Jersey cow is King George. So we have King George. On top of a Jersey cow. On top of a on top of a plate. Good. On King George's head is a cut. On King George's head is a cut. On King George. Sitting on Jersey cow. On plate. Very good. On top of, on King George is also his nose, which says a chew. So we have his nose, which says a chew, and his on King George, on Jersey cow, on plate made by. Good. All right. Now, on top of his nose that just said a chew is Mary, Queen of Scots. So we have
Mary Queen of Scots,
on a nose that says a shoe. And he has a
cut,
on,
King George,
on,
Jersey cow,
on,
pencil,
on.
plate, made by Della.
Good. On top of Mary Queen of Scots is a weather vane pointing south. There is a weather vane
Pointing south,
on
Mary Queen of Scots,
on a nose that says a shoe, and a
cut,
on,
King George,
on,
Jersey cow,
on,
pencil,
on.
plate, made by Della.
Good. On top of the weather vane pointing south is a big ham. There is a
Big ham,
on, weather vane pointing south, on,
Mary Queen of Scots,
on, nose that says a shoe, with a cut on,
King George,
on,
Jersey cow,
on,
pencil,
on.
plate, made by Della.
Good. On top of that ham, you see a sticker said made in Virginia. It's a Virginia ham. So we have a sticker that says made in Virginia on a weather vane pointing south on
Mary Queen of Scots,
and a
cut,
on. Oh, I did. Thank you. Mary Queen of Scots on nose that says a shoe and a on King George on a Jersey cow on a pencil on a plate made by Della. Good. We only have a couple more. On top of that sticker that says made in Virginia, there is a York peppermint patty. We have a York peppermint patty on a sticker that says made in Virginia, on a ham, on a weather vane pointing south, on Mary Queen of Scots, on a nose that says a shoe, with a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. On top of the York peppermint patty is a weather vane pointing north. So we have a weather vane pointing north on a York peppermint patty, on a sticker made in Virginia, on a ham, on a weather vane pointing south, on Mary Queen of Scots, on a nose that says a shoe, and a cut on King George, and a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Finally, on that weather vane pointing north, we have a Rhode Island red rooster. So there is a Rhode Island red rooster on a weather vane pointing north, on a York peppermint patty, on a sticker made in Virginia, on a ham, on a weather vane pointing south, on Mary Queen of Scots, on a nose that says a shoe, on a cut, on a King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. That's fantastic. You all have memorized in order the 13 colonies to ratify the United States Constitution. We will start at the bottom. Delaware, and then Pennsylvania, and then Jersey, New Jersey, and then what would King George be? Georgia, very good. 2. Massachusetts, and then Mary Queen of Scots would be Maryland. Weather vane pointing south would be, remember we have north coming out, South Carolina. The ham would be there's 2 of them. Yep, the ham would be New Hampshire, and then in sticker says Virginia, then York peppermint patty, New York, North Carolina, and finally Rhode Island, okay, in order. So again, the stacking example is very nice. The one thing that is great for older students with that stacking example, even though it really isn't, it's a memorization, so it is a grammar activity. The nice thing about it is that as you're doing these things, if you can come up with creative ways, you all may not have, you may have figured it out, but you may not have known what you were memorizing. It was kind of fun though, right? You're trying to remember all these things and this picture in your mind. And, but then you tell them, you just memorized. I mean, can you imagine if you came into your class and said, guys, today we're going to memorize the first 13 colonies in order that ratified the United States Constitution. You're going to have some that are going to groan, ugh. But by doing it this way and using a mnemonic device, It's a great way for them to connect something in such a way, and they will remember that stack for the rest of their life.
What was the cut on things?
Connecticut. The other one is, that I have for an example on mnemonic devices, is vocabulary cartoons. These can be found in bookstores. You just Google it, vocabulary cartoons. There are actually several volumes of these. These are designed with SAT vocabulary in mind, so they are, again, designed for older students, but you can even take a look at it and then pare it down for younger students for vocabulary. What it does is it gives the students the vocabulary word, the vocabulary term, the definition. It then gives a link, and it's some sort of link that matches kind of the definition, either in sound or kind of as a parody of it. And then there's a cartoon with a sentence that ties the link to the vocabulary word. So I'm going to give you an example of the word quixotic. Okay, in this book there's a word quixotic. Quixotic means, the definition is kind of strange or odd, a little bit out of the normal is quixotic. It's an adjective. The link is idiotic. Almost always the link matches the part of speech, which I really like, so that you're kind of linking like terms. And then the picture is this boy who kind of looks like Waldo, and where's Waldo? He has this big hat on. He is clothed from head to toe, even though the sun is beating down and the rest of those walking along the sidewalk are in tank tops and shorts. It's clearly a hot summer day. It looks like New York City. Buildings are everywhere, and he, instead of being on the sidewalk, is in the middle of the street skating without looking where he's going. He just looks a little quixotic, okay? a little odd, a little out of place, out of character. And then the caption underneath said, Joe, in his roller skates and all of his decor, looked a little quixotic as he rolled down the street. So vocabulary cartoons are great in that you're making those, again, those connections. So they see on a test, quixotic links to idiotic. What was that picture I saw? That was an idiotic picture. Okay, and they link that in, and so it helps them memorize in that way. Again, it's designed for older students, but it certainly can be, you could pare it down, you could have your kindergartners make their own pictures that link to the vocabulary that they're learning, or your younger students. Okay, logic tools. Use these tools regularly for students in grades 5 through 10. Use these tools for all students when they ask why and how. I should put an asterisk right here. Okay, when students who are staunchly in those grammar level years, when they're in preschool, when they're 2, when they're in kindergarten and first grade, and they say, why? Why is the sky blue? Why is the sun yellow? Why did God make that tree that tall? They are not really asking why on a logic level. If I actually explain to them why a tree grows and how the process grows, or why light reflects and refracts and bends at certain angles, and why our eye perceives those wavelengths and different colors, and Roy G. Biv and all of those things, that's not what the child is asking when the child says, why is the sky blue? The child really wants to know who made the sky blue, or what for is the sky blue. They're really asking a grammar level question with a why start. Okay? But when students start actually asking why or how, and they're asking for process and reasoning and further explanation, that's when you want to grab a logic tool. Logic tools help us as teachers to organize materials and teach process. Unit and lesson plan focus when using logic tools should be on cause and effect, connections between concepts, and the whys and hows of subjects. So here are some good examples of logic tools, and we'll practice a couple of these together. The first one, and one that I love, and it applies across the board for every subject, you can use Socratic method. In a way, the Shirley Grammar jingles and the question-answer flow really is Socratic method. So there is an example there. It's called direct method. There are two types. Now, there are two types. Originally, in the original definition, Socratic method is a form of inquiry that was developed by Socrates, engaging a student in a series of questions and answers to discover truth, usually through an indirect method. This is leading them to a contradiction that proves the original premise false. It's indirect reasoning or inductive reasoning. Sometimes we do that in geometry as well when you do proofs, indirect proofs. That is the Socratic method, using questions and answers. Originally, when Socrates developed it, he did it with scholars who were of higher level thinking, age, and order of brain already. And so he would often use that indirect method. However, we have developed it in the classical world to expand it to include both a direct and an indirect discovery of truth through question and answer. Now, the direct method of discovery can be used as early as those grammar years, even though it's a logic tool. It can be used in Shirley Grammar. We start our Shirley Grammar in first grade, and they learn how to ask the questions and then answer them, and the answer is the label of the part of speech of the sentence. The example that I'm going to give you of direct method, since you already have that Shirley one, is I'm going to give you an example of solving an equation, and I do need a marker. Oh, good, there's one here. Okay. So we are going to solve an equation. How many of you teach math? Okay. What grade?
All of them.
Okay, good. All right. So you will help me. All right. So the equation that we are going to we'll dust it off together. Okay. The equation we're going to use is 2x plus 3 equals 4x minus 7. I am going to ask a series of questions, and you are going to answer them. As you answer them, we will work through this problem together. So it's a series of using Socratic method to solve an algebra equation. Is my variable on one or two sides of the equation? Two. Which term should I move? Please answer this one. 2x. How do I move it? What operation? Subtraction. Very good. What are the three questions to ask? Now, you don't know the three questions. This would be what I would have already taught my students in terms of how to solve any algebra equation. We start with memorizing three questions to ask, and there are answers to them. The three questions are, what is attached to my variable, how is it attached, and how do I move it to the other side? So I'm going to ask those in one at a time order, and you're going to answer them. So we ask, what is attached to my variable? 2 and 7. Since there are more, I would say, which do I focus on first? 7. How do I move, or excuse me, how is it attached?
Minus 7.
How do I move it? Addition. And now I ask them again, what is attached to my variable? 2. How is it attached? Multiplication. How do I move it? Division. Is 5 equals x the same as x equals 5? Yes. What property states this to be true? Not association. Good try. It starts with an S. This one's the property of symmetry. Okay. So x equals 5 is the same as 5 equals x, means we can spin it around the equal sign, and so that's the property of symmetry. So notice in this model, we used a direct Socratic method to go from question to answer to lead us to truth, namely our answer, our solution for x. I would always teach the properties first so they'd know them, the three questions to ask. So this, of course, is all built up after, you don't start with a problem like this. But once you've learned enough questions and answers, and once you've learned enough terminology, you can use the Socratic method to help students get to answers, find truth. What I love about using Socratic method for math, and specifically for algebra, if you ever teach algebra or pre-algebra to students, is if you have students, you're going to always have students who, that's a gift, it's a talent that they've had, math just kind of clicks. They'll still appreciate this. They'll be able to rattle off those questions and answers. They'll get enjoyment out of doing it quickly and knowing even what's the next question that you're going to ask. They'll be able to start asking those questions for themselves. But even the students who math has always come hard, they've struggled with it, they've developed kind of a resistance to it, they have been told over the years maybe by someone that they can't do math, which is really not what we want to tell students, because all students can do this. They will love learning, just like our kids love Shirley English. And they love it because they can find the adjectives and the adverbs, and they know what a preposition is, and they know where a prepositional phrase is, and they can say if the sentence is in natural and inverted order, which confuses their parents. I mean, they love that, even from very young. Same thing here. It gives them the tools, step by step, to ask a question, get an answer, to solve an algebra equation. Right? This is something we don't teach because there's a lot more foundational grammar we need to teach in those younger years. But if students were given, this is what this is called symmetry, we're going to memorize that, and these are the questions to ask, they could probably do this starting in 4th, 5th grade, even though we don't usually teach algebra too much later. The point is that it is a tool that even students who struggle, even students who have struggled with math in the high school years, the Socratic method is a great method to let them help find that truth, find the answer in a logical, linear way. Okay, an example of indirect method. All right, this one is going to take a little bit more thought, and this one we would only use for higher level students in schools of logic, schools of rhetoric, that 7th through 12th grade time frame. But this also, I decided to pick young earth creation. So we're talking maybe science here, we're also talking theology at the same time because we are talking biblical worldview, we're talking creation science, but let's go ahead and try this one together and see how it plays out. Does an evolutionist believe in a young earth creation? No. So let's assume the premise. The earth is billions of years old. Here's the indirect part. If the earth is billions of years old, then the universe must also be what? Billions of years old. If the universe is billions of years old, then have our solar system and other galaxies likewise been in space for billions of years? Yes. Is our solar system expanding or contracting over time in space? Expanding, good. And has there been any evidence of this process reversing or fluctuating over the time it has been measured? No. And if we were to reverse the process of time, that is, go back in time, what should our solar system be doing? Contracting, right, very good. And is there enough distance between the sun and the earth for this contracting of our solar system to allow the process to continue over billions of years and still promote life to exist on earth? No. Now, if your students couldn't answer no at that point, that would be where you would pause the Socratic method and you would have them measure. You would have them research. You would have them gather evidence. What things would they want to gather and seek knowledge on? Well, they could seek knowledge on the following: the distance between the earth and the sun. That is a measurable number. The rate of expansion that can be measured scientifically. The distance that the earth must be from the sun to still allow for life. They could calculate the distance between the sun and Mercury, for example, since we know that carbon-based life cannot exist there. So after they collect all of their numbers and all of their data, you come back to them and say, therefore, since our solar system does not have the room to contract over this vast amount of time, what do we know about the premise? The premise is false. It is not billions of years old. At this point, you could have the students then go through the same method and do millions of years, and then do hundreds of thousands of years, until eventually you can establish a case for a young earth. What's interesting about evolutionists is they love to use this uniformity of decay, right, over time, to prove why we need billions of years in order for life to have evolved on Earth. But if you take that same uniformity and apply it to the solar system, it doesn't work. You get to where it should have been a Big Bang way before there should have been a Big Bang. Okay? So the Socratic method, the indirect method, can help older students start to develop that process of discovering truth also. And what's great is as they get good at this, if you practice with them, then they can then apply this as they are having discussions with their friends. And instead of arguing back and forth and just seeing past one another, they can start just asking their friends questions slowly and saying, well, let's assume you're right. If you're right, then this. If that, then this. And you get to a point where the person has to admit that you can't be right. because you've ended up at a spot. And that was what was brilliant about Socrates in his time, how he could get scholars to, and even his adversaries that he was arguing against, to concede his point simply by starting by agreeing with their point and then leading to them to the fact that their point could not be possibly true. Okay, teaching questions to ask and answer. When we have students memorize a question-answer flow, for example, Shirley, we are combining grammar and logic tools. We are also teaching a way to seek knowledge, asking the right questions to obtain correct answers. The more you use Socratic method and help your students start to do the same, the more we prepare students with the tools to learn independently. Okay, so we're at rhetoric tools now.
It is almost 5.
Okay, perfect. Okay, use these tools regularly for students in high school. Use these tools for all students as they express new thoughts, original interpretation, or creative expression. We talked a little bit earlier about how when preschoolers and kindergarten and first grade young grammar school students ask why and how, they're not in the logic stage yet. And likewise, for the rhetoric stage, the rhetoric stage is where students learn to be creative, expressive. And when I meet with my potential families that come in, prospective parents that come in, and I explain the grammar stage because I really like to focus on the trivium. I try not to do too much of the quadrivium yet because I want to just give them a brief overview to start. So I start with the grammar level, and they're head nodding, and it makes a lot of sense to them. And we get to the logic level, and they're still head nodding, and it makes a lot of sense to them. And then I say, and then the student can master the rhetoric level, where they become persuasive and eloquent, and adding their own unique voice to the great conversation. They're creative and able, and they start to frown at me. And the reason is because they're thinking about their precious 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old who is very creative already. And of course, creativity is one of those gifts that God gives to human beings. That's what we are as His crown of creation. It is what makes us in His image, is that creativeness that animals and plants do not have. So when we talk about rhetoric tools, we have to be careful because we are not trying to say that we cannot have any creativity whatsoever until we get to high school. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is the tools that we grab that work for rhetoric, just like we said when students who are young ask why and how, they're not asking a logic level question. They're asking a question in a grammatical way. But even at the grammar level, students, of course, are creative. Rhetoric, though, helps us as teachers, these tools, to help students express themselves eloquently, persuasively, and effectively. So I point the parents back to this. Yes, your child is creative. And yes, if you gave your child a paper and asked them to finger paint, and of course, as a mom or dad, you would be, oh, so proud. It's so beautiful. But is it truly beautiful in that rhetorical definition? Is that the highest level of art that they can ever attain in life? Well, no, of course not. Parents would say no. And so that is where you can help them see, we use rhetoric tools not to define creativity maybe the way the world defines creativity, but to say the highest level of individual eloquence, persuasiveness, creativity that God has gifted that child to become. That we need to wait for until they develop and have all these tools in place. When you write lesson and unit plans, make sure you focus on rhetoric tools. They will be things like interpretation, refutation, argumentation, and the creation of new material. So, classical rhetoric tools, and Dr. Talman is giving another rhetoric presentation tomorrow. I am giving another rhetoric presentation tomorrow that talks about some of these tools. So I'm not going to go into them in detail here today, but there are the 5 divisions of classical rhetoric: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. Each one of those could be a whole year of study. So there's a lot there. The 3 Aristotelian appeals, it's part of the division of invention: logos, pathos, ethos. Writing and oratory using the progymnasmata. This is a series of exercises. You almost see like gymnastics in there. It's a series of written and oral exercises to become a better writer and speaker. Classical composition, Mr. Jim Selby, Memorial Press, actually takes students through these exercises for writing. Studying classical tropes and figures and emulating great writers and orators of the past, that has to do with the third division of rhetoric, style. Those are all tools that you have at that rhetoric level. And we can't go into them now, but they are definitely worth your time if you have students at that level. All right, quadrivium tools, intentionality with numbers. Arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy are the 4 branches that make up the quadrivium, and Bose summarizes them very well as the study of numbers, the study of numbers in space, the study of numbers in time, and the study of numbers in space and time. Ways to incorporate the quadrivium into all subject areas. How many of you have been going to Janet Luke's presentation? Have any of you gone to that one? Okay. She talks about how she starts it with talking about how music is all parts of the trivium and quadrivium, and likewise all of the other subject matters are music. And so she has her students say, how is music history? How is music math? How is music English? How is music science? Okay? And there are places, and so we're going to do a little bit of that right now. So we're going to talk about how is the quadrivium grammar. Well, there's the difference. These are just some examples. There's the difference between ordinal and cardinal numbers, for example. Even those of us who are involved in this resurgence of classical education are not always careful. We kind of get sloppy with how we use our words. There's a big difference between an ordinal number and first, second, third, and a cardinal number, 1, 2, 3. Okay, today is what date? July 15. Today is the 15th of July, if you want to talk about the order, but otherwise, if we say it as a calendar date, it's July 15th. Think about it. Have you ever seen a calendar where it says first, second, third in the little boxes? No. Today is July 15th, right? So that's a way where numbers affect grammar, or grammar has a right and wrong way to say numbers. Plurality, comparative versus superlative adjectives, singing jingles. Those are all ways that we can incorporate the quadrivium into grammar. Quadrivium into science, measurements, data and experiments. These are all number things. Using direct and indirect proofs in geometry in addition to the scientific method. Seeing proportion and infinite repetition in nature, singing jingles. History, dates, numerical facts and figures. Studying the great mathematicians and scientists of the past. Singing jingles. I think you can see here that anytime you're singing and you got music, okay, you can incorporate music into everything. Fine arts, rhythm, counting beats, proportion of primary colors to secondary colors, studying and performing music, learning proportions of thirds, fourths, fifths, and octaves, and singing, period. Okay. Finally, theology. Actually, there's one more after that. Theology, God's orderly quantified creation, the concept of infinity. Older students love pondering that. Chanting and singing in chapel, and the quadrivium of mathematics. Obviously, that one does not need any example. So notice that when we talk about taking our subjects and integrating them, we talk about that as being horizontal integration, helping students see that God's world connects. That, yes, we need to study them separately. We need to focus on them, to understand them, to memorize them, to have a set of focus. But God didn't say on day 1, let there be math, and on day 2, let there be history, and on day 3, let there be English, and let them never touch. He created an integrated world. And so helping students see how the trivium and the quadrivium fit with one another in your lessons as you're teaching, using the tools. Okay, so we are finally at the point where we're going to talk about how you actually write these things down. Okay? And again, if you take anything away from today, it is that the most important thing that we have covered is what we just covered. Writing lesson plans classically is about knowing your tools, knowing what level your students are at, knowing what you're trying to teach in terms of content, and knowing which tools, grammar, logic, rhetoric, quadrivium, that you can grab to help your students master that material. When you start to put that plan into action, you want to start with the broadest component of your subject. So that would be a course plan often called in colleges and higher level learning a syllabus. I have a few things to pass around to show you what you can do with the syllabus. Now, this is my syllabus from this past year. This was 9th grade English. The second page is just rules and classroom guidelines and so forth. So I really want to focus on that first page where I talk about the course objective. I talk about how we're going to cover it in the grammar, how we're going to cover it logic, how are we going to cover it rhetoric. So I have some objectives, grammar objectives, logic objectives, rhetoric objectives. From the very first day, I want my students to know that this is intentional in terms of the tools that we're going to be using. Okay? And then I talk about the course of study and I show kind of our unit outlines and so forth. Now, I'm going to pass around next. This was given to me actually at the beginning of my year at my house by my teacher of my eldest, who was in kindergarten this past year. And she came to me and she handed me this, and this is, of course, I've only been here about a month and a half, so I'm still getting to know my teachers, getting to know how they do things and so forth. And she handed it to me. It's called an MLCA Kindergarten Parent Survival Guide, Parent Information. The first part right here, it says main kindergarten theme, the world God gave us. My kindergarten teacher ties everything to God's world. Every unit of study is God's creation and God's beautiful world of butterflies, God's beautiful world of rivers, God's beautiful world of bones. Whatever it is that they're studying, everything is back to God. And then it says art, names primary colors, names secondary colors, states job of illustrator, reproduces copy form. Bible states the Bible is God's word, and so forth and so forth and so forth. English grammar, geography, history. We do not have social studies. Neither should you. Please rename it if you do. Literature, phonics, math. Okay. This is a syllabus. Now, nowhere in here did it say syllabus. I think it would frighten parents of kindergartners if you handed them a syllabus. Okay, but this is a syllabus. It shows what the student will achieve, what the student is learning, what the student is being taught. The only thing that we're going to add to this over time is, well, of course, it'll all be at that grammar level, but kind of helping parents to understand the grammar level tools that we use. A lot of jingles will be sung. We'll do a lot of chants. We are going to do the memorization. There's going to be catechesis for our Learn by Heart program, that sort of thing, and helping parents to start get comfortable with the tools too. Next, after you do your course plan, the next thing is unit planning. There's a variety of ways you can do it. I'm going to pass around 3 things. This is a quarter unit plan, so this is how I can plan quarter by quarter, map out what I'm going to be teaching. I have my little trivium level codes up there, grammar, logic, rhetoric. This is what the kindergarten teacher uses. Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. This is what the kindergarten teacher uses, and I have these all scanned in as PDFs, so if you request this, I can email the handouts too. And this just shows by theme what the themes are going to be. And then here is, Melinda Heine was talking about this today, I was so excited, but we are working on a curriculum guide at MLCA. We're going to be done by the end of this year. It's going to be a big project. This is an example. This is 4th grade. Let's see if the page remembers. It's 7 pages long. This is vocabulary. This is just 4th grade, just vocabulary. Every one of my teachers is going to be doing it for every one of our subjects: vocabulary, literature, grammar, math, science, history, and so forth, in every grade, starting in 2s, and we're going to get it done, and it's going to be a big binder by the end of it. And Melinda is exactly right. I have parents coming in saying, well, what do you do for 4th grade vocabulary? And I tell you, what they don't want me to say is, oh, we use Wordly Wise curriculum. That does not tell parents anything, and we really, as classical educators, should not just be naming and spouting off curriculum. We should be having a guide. We should be having a map that says, this is what we're teaching, this is what the students are learning. And if you look at that curriculum guide, you'll see also that it will have codes at the end, grammar, logic, rhetoric, what we're focusing on, what tools we're using. Okay. Once you get that done, you've done your course plan, you've done your determination of the trivium and quadrivium tools to use based on the subject and the student's age. You define the scope and sequence in the quarter plans and in the unit plans and in the course guides, the study guide, or excuse me, the subject guides. Then, for each unit, we're going to break down the plans in terms of daily lessons. Now, how do you do this? You have I mean, by now, we've kind of started broad and we've focused down narrow, and you have exactly the direction you want to go, and you know the tools you want to use, and you probably have even ideas in your heads of how the lesson is going to shape. Now you just got to write it down so that your administrator can see it, so that you can look back at it later. Sometimes a lesson doesn't go well, especially if you're trying a new approach, you're trying a new Socratic method, you're trying, something you haven't done in that particular lesson before. You're trying a stacking one, you're trying to get kids to memorize in such a way. And so it's helpful to look back then and say, oh, did I ask too many why and how questions in my Socratic method to my second graders? We don't want to ask why and how questions if they're just in second grade, that sort of thing. So it's very helpful to get down on paper, but the way you do it can have a variety. I said before, you could do it if you have a teacher who loves spreadsheets, you can make a spreadsheet. Okay, I had a teacher who just created a simple spreadsheet in Word and then hand wrote it in. And then I have teachers that use My Teacher Lesson Plan book, whatever the year is, that you can buy at any teacher store. Okay, there's nothing classical or progressive one way or other about this. This is just a tool. Okay, just like we all use pencils, right? They're all tools. If you use that PowerPoint, we don't have a classical light bulb versus a progressive light bulb. These are just tools that we have as classical educators to make sure that we are doing things the way we need to do them. All right, so then we intentionally add appropriate trivium and quadrivium tools. The key word is intentionally. Okay, it's so easy to just fall back and say, well, I have my Saxon curriculum, or, well, I have my, Shirley English, I have my grammar jingles, and to not be thinking about, am I using the tools to the best of my ability to help students discern truth? Label your tools in your lesson plans. You can do this, as I said, in a variety of ways. That method does not matter. And then have regular reviews with your fellow teacher and your headmaster or your principal to analyze the classical components of the plan. Okay? Your principal or your spouse, if you're a homeschool educator, would love to sit down and partner with you on that. I've already passed out the samples, and they're kind of coming around. As I mentioned, if you want a PDF version of all of those, just when you email me and request a copy of the PowerPoint, just also say handouts, and I'd be happy to send it to you. My email is at the bottom. Questions or thoughts?